Thank you so much. So I want to start this off by asking you to think of your favorite restaurant or fast food place. Can you picture their sign? The reason I asked is because if you can, that place probably has a specific brand or logo that comes to mind. And even though the Anchorline Steamboat Company isn't around anymore, they're not truly gone because they created a brand that is still studied and celebrated today. The story starts in 1859. This is the height of the Steamboat Golden Era, and a small company known as the Memphis and St. Louis Packet Line has 4 boats that deliver mail and packages along the routes between, obviously, Memphis and St. Louis. Now, just a few years later, a devastating event would happen and they'd catch a lucky break. So the Civil War starts and all ports south of Memphis are closed. That means a lot of your major steamboat companies lose business, but not this young company. All of their ports are union owned, so they're able to grow. And by the end of the war, again, they have not lost money. They've added those ports, they're able to grow, as I just said. So by the 1870s, they are ready to become the brand that we remember today. Starting that decade off strong was company president John A. Scudder, who oversaw a merger that added boats to their fleet. More boats means more money, means they can focus on how they want to grow as a company, and they decided that instead of buying boats for the company, they were gonna have boats be built, which meant in 1871, the very first of these boats left the shipyard, and it was the city of Helena. So I'll place this here. I don't know how well you can see right here. Now, already it was a different size, different kind of boat than the ones they had, because this boat was built to deliver a train. Again, we've kind of gone into those details. We'll go into them more, so we'll move past that. But already in the name, we see a distinct branding happening. So most steamboats were named after people. Anchorline said, we are gonna honor the ports that we serve and name our boats after them, so City of Helena. Anchorline also wanted you to know it was an Anchorline boat, even if you could not see the name. So again, I don't know how well you can see, but part of the way they did that was to adopt a golden anchor symbol, and they would decorate their boats with it. If you can't see very well in between the smokestacks, I've done a fabulous drawing, kind of what it looked like. In between the smokestacks, they would hang this symbol, so you would see it coming from far away. If you weren't near the river, you could hear a distinct whistle. Luckily for you, I can't whistle. Of one short, one long, one short blow, and you know that was Anchorline. By 1874, these changes were cemented and the company officially became Anchorline Steamboat Company. By the late 70s, they were setting industry standards as other businesses tried to keep up. They introduced a meal plan instead of just a complimentary buffet. They paid their porters, bringing more business into areas, and they announced that they would start going to New Orleans as well. And with that, they'd be stopping in Helena 6 days a week. One local newspaper, the Daily Independent in Helena, noted how lucky that was for travelers at that time, saying, this line is run by the best organized of any running, oh my goodness, I got so excited. Let me restart that. This line is by far the best organized of any running steamers on Western waters, and the incalculable benefits this city has derived from it is shown every day. So again, a favorite way of transportation. This meant by the 80s, this company's going full steam. It's at the height of its business, but unfortunately, it's in a dying industry. So the 1880s, they actually changed their name to the St. Louis and New Orleans Anchorline Company. For this presentation, we're just gonna keep saying Anchorline. But that was to show how much they had grown, how they planned to grow. They opened an office in Memphis as well, but it's not all good. In 1885, the steamboat City of Helena burns in Memphis. That same year, they have to cut wages. In the 1890s, they cannot escape that their industry is dying. For one, they are trying to grow. They opened the Helena warehouse, Anchorline warehouse in Helena, selling wheat and corn, but that same year, 1892, the Mississippi floods, destroys most crops, makes most ports unavailable, and that leads us to railroads who were just really doing the industry in because they did not have to rely on flooding and whatnot. And then finally, a tornado hits St. Louis, destroys most boats, and even though the company tried to rebuild, they would never recover financially. So in 1898, they sell the rest of their fleet, they cease operations. But as I said, no, you and I cannot go on an Anchor Line steamboat today, but they created a brand so powerful, they're not gone today.
All right, Cara talked a minute ago about kind of the dying off of the steamboats, and in many ways, the transportation of locomotives by steamboats is very common in the later part of the 19th century. In a way, it's like passing the baton from this old type of transportation to the new, more advanced type of transportation that was coming afterwards. And so in the late part of the 19th century, we started seeing a lot of changes that were taking place here in Arkansas. We started seeing changes in the type of transportation that was had. Now, one type of transportation that was proposed back in 1871 was the start of a railroad that would go from Helena all the way to Little Rock. And this gentleman right here, Stephen Dorsey, he was made president of what was going to be the Central Arkansas Railroad. Now, the original railroad that took place was back between Memphis and Little Rock, which was a form of railroad structured between 1854 and 1871. And we started seeing these plans to build railroads throughout different parts of Arkansas. Well, Mr. Dorsey here, he actually was looking at making Helena the central part of the railroad and having it branch off different places, Texas, Louisiana, Memphis, and having Helena as a central hub. This was something that he proposed to people. Now, there was a bit of a problem with this gentleman because Stephen Dorsey was a carpetbagger. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a carpetbagger was, these were Northerners who were brought down here to the South. And it could either mean one of two things. It either mean that their political affiliations were that of the North, which was more Republican at that time, or it could mean that they took advantage of people from the South and tried to get personal financial gain from the people here. Well, in the case of Stephen Dorsey, he was actually a little bit of both. And so several people from here in Helena would actually pay bonds to him. And so basically, bonds were created from people who were living here. There was actually a company in New York which actually gave $1.2 million in bonds to Mr. Dorsey. And this right here kind of shows some of the debt that still need to be paid off after he left. And so this here, kind of on that top line, it says $150,000 in indebtedness as a result of the Arkansas Central Railroad. Well, what he did is that he took those bonds and he sold them. Had some legal action later, but this was kind of what happened. And then so for a while, Central Arkansas Railroad was put on hold. That was until about the 1870s. Then we started getting to the 1870s. We started having a new president, A.H. Johnson, and we started getting a new owner, a local gentleman by the name of Mr. Horner. And the Horners were very big. They were very prominent people in the community who had a lot of money. So they put some money into the Central Arkansas Railroad, and over time, it changed hands and became something else. And so eventually they ended up laying some line. It didn't go all the way to Little Rock, but they did have some line that was laid between Helena and Curator. Later, they would actually add a train roundtable as well back in Helena, back in the later part of the 1880s. And so the line would eventually become the Arkansas Midland Railroad. And so these two pictures here were both taken back in the 1890s. And this is what the train depot would have looked like back in the 1890s when it was the Arkansas Midland. And here's another picture of the same one. And a lot of things were proposed. There was different lines that were being proposed. There's one from Indian Bay to Pine City in Little Rock. There's another one from Pine City to Brinkley. But nothing ever came about from this. But over time, this line that was laid between Clarendon and Little Rock, this opened the way towards other lines, and this opened up the way towards more transportation. And this particular line would go all the way into the 1940s, when the last piece of that track was removed. But this was a way of transportation back in the later part of the 19th century. It helped branch things out in the later part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, and help expand parts of the Arkansas Delta that we had never seen before, and opened up passengers as well as agriculture and commerce. So from there on out, I'm going to pass it on to Joseph, and he's going to bring a little bit more clarity to this event and what happened.
Thank you, Richard. So to get us back to Helena, Arkansas, and specifically January 7th, 1872. So to go ahead and just give you the juicy little behind-the-scenes secret here, we really don't have any first-hand accounts on this event. Unfortunately, there is this really weird block of history in Helena where the newspapers just kind of weren't saved. So in the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s, we kind of have to look elsewhere. A good example of this is with this specific event, because the Public Ledger, a newspaper out of Memphis, Tennessee, published to let the locals know that the city of Helena riverboat was coming down on its maiden voyage, and to have your tickets ready. And it had to publish this notice a bunch of times because for some reason that we still don't know, the city of Helena was being waylaid further upriver. And so on the 5th and the 6th and the 7th, there were just notices in the paper. It's like, City of Helena was supposed to rise today, but it's not. Keep your tickets ready. It'll be by tomorrow. Finally, on January the 8th, we get a little notice that says that the city of Helena had arrived down in Helena, Arkansas at midday, and revelry was had by all. So it arrived midday. What can we kind of parse out to happen then? Well, obviously the first thing is they're going to unload the locomotive. What is that going to look like? Once again, we don't know exactly, but we can make a couple of good educated guesses from anecdotal and circumstantial things and various other pieces of evidence. We know that there wasn't any recorded evidence of a crane or derrick that would have been large enough in order to hoist this locomotive up off the deck of the city of Helena and lower it onto the river landing. So we can make a hypothesis that it was rolled off. They would have put on rails and rolled the locomotive off of the boat onto the river landing, and then rolled it over to the tracks over south of Elm Street. Now, after they got the locomotive situated, of course, there would have been some speeches. And of course, everyone in town would have been primped and preened, showing themselves off and, making sure that they were seen in this magnanimous moment. And then we get to the partying. So once again, we don't know where these parties would have taken place, but we can make two really good educated guesses. The first was in a place on Ohio Street called Krebs Fitzpatrick Hall. So this is the north end of Ohio Street in 1927. Now, if you look over here specifically, this building, this is Krebs Fitzpatrick Hall. This is a two-story brick building that was used for years in order to house a number of organizations and events, most notably the Lotus Club, as well as a number of fraternal organizations, various churches. They all would meet on the second floor of this hall in order, just because it was available, and it was right next to the intersection of Ryder and Ohio Street, which at that time was considered the town square. Another option would have been the county courthouse. Now, of course, I know what you're first thinking. It's like, Ian Joseph, this is a party. Would they have a party at the courthouse? Yeah, we do know that they had parties at the courthouse. This building sat over on Market Street, and it was constructed in 1869. A fun fact about this building is everyone loved to complain about how much it cost to build. They thought it was too expensive. Now, we know from other stories that they had all kinds of parties and lectures and talks and various other things on the second floor of this building. It was a very expansive courtroom. And so it would not be that hard to see the judge saying, Yes, of course, for this singular instance with this very important event, of course, we're going to have the party, and yes, I will allow you to have it in the courthouse. Now, and of course, finally, what kind of partying? As I stated before, there were a lot of saloons on Ohio Street, most of them open 24/7. So with that bit of knowledge, it wouldn't be so hard to imagine just how fun the parties would have been. So that gives you an idea of an event that was celebrated for years afterwards in Helena, Arkansas, as one of the major turning points in the city's history. As a final little anecdote, I'll share one of my favorite things about this. Of course, Cara showed you a photo of the city of Helena steamboat. We don't have any photos of the Arkansas Central Railroad's Helena locomotive. We do know what it looked like. We found the order that was given to Baldwin Locomotive Works, so we know what the locomotive work looked like, but we don't have any photos. But we can make a really good educated guess with the help of Walt Disney, because if you go over to Disneyland and you go to the Disneyland Railroad, Lily Bell, I do believe it's their number 6 locomotive, is a 260 mogul type tender narrow gauge locomotive. If you were to paint it black and strip off all the brass finery, you'd have a really, really good idea of what number 1 locomotive Helena would have looked like back in 1872 when it arrived in Helena, Arkansas. All right, so if I can just say to Richard, thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Oh, thank you so much. I was glad to be here. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And thank you to Cara for coming down. So
Always. It's always a good time.
great presentation for all of us.